Okay, we are live to YouTube. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's Comprehensive Plan Steering Committee meeting. And thank you to all the committee members and to the chairs of the other various boards in town. We really appreciate your being here. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, quick reminder, our page on the town website is a great source of information about our project and what we're up to. And right now we need your help. If you haven't taken our participation survey already, please visit the webpage and click on the links, and then you'll get to go right to SurveyMonkey. It's available right now in English and Spanish. And then one more thing to draw your attention to, right now it's at the bottom of the page. You can see here we have Google Translate Live, so you can interact with our page and read all the text on the web page in a bunch of different languages. So with that, I am going to pass the ball to Valerie from Nelson Pope Voorhees and let her kick off her portion of the agenda.
Okay,
Thank
great.
you so much.
Thanks, Katie. All right, so today we're going to talk, the first thing we're going to do as part of our agenda is I'm going to start providing you over the next few months a little bit of information on what we're finding as part of our inventory and analysis report. The information that I'm sharing tonight is just a small piece of the whole report, and the information that I'll be sharing over the next few months will also be a small piece of the whole report. I just wanted to touch base a little bit on the report itself because I think it's really important. So the inventory analysis report, because I've been speaking with a lot of the town committees and boards, and a number of people have asked me similar questions as to, is it going to contain absolutely like all the details possible in terms of the town of Lewisboro? And the answer is no. It really is meant to be a snapshot and to really identify certain trends. More specifically, so for example, as we're going through our public meetings, if we're starting to get community feedback, and let's just say the community feedback is, that we're finding that, seniors don't have a lot of places to live within the town of Lewisboro. And we can look at the data that we've identified in terms of, is the town of Lewisboro's population aging, right? Are we looking at that a lot of people are aging in place? That information then can say, yes, you know what? In all reality, we're finding that cycle of housing is not taking place in terms of people downsizing because they don't have other places to move to in the town, and they still want to reside in the town. So that's where that information can be helpful in terms of the inventory analysis report. And one of the things that was always the limitation is dealing with the actual data itself, right? We can use publicly available data. We can use data that the town is able to provide us, but those are the limitations. So there's always a standard of error, but for the most part, the information does tell you the general trends. And so when you do receive the report, which will be, we're anticipating having the report to you in December for a draft for your review, you will notice when we highlight certain information could be potentially, within the standard of error, and also some of the other limitations of the information. But for the most part, I think it really will provide you a general sense of what's taking place in the town of Lewisboro. So with that, I'll just jump right into the presentation. All right. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So tonight I'm only talking about 2 of the chapters. And again, it's only a little, some of the information in both those chapters, but we're focusing on the demographics and housing elements of the town of Lewisboro. So first, before I dive into that, I wanted to just kind of touch base again with this committee as to where we are in the process, and also the public that might be watching. So we're in the process of doing, right now, we're in the process of doing the existing conditions analysis. We are also working with and meeting up with a lot of the town boards and town committees, and that's also taking place over the last month, this month. And then we might be able to secure a few more committee meetings over the next month or so. So we're hoping to wrap that up, and feedback that we get from the town committees is also land use boards will be wrapped into the existing conditions, which we're calling the inventory analysis report. So the plan topics, again, this is for the committee and also for the community at large, is, these are all the different various plan topics that will go into the comprehensive plan as well as into the inventory analysis report. So as you can see, its breadth is very wide in terms of topics that get covered, and you will know, and as when you receive the information in terms of the report, as also in terms of presentations and stuff, you'll see it is pretty detailed, but it's not all exhaustive because the town is a very large town and there's a lot going on within the town, and we're also open to identifying and adding additional information as we go through the process. But for the most part, once we have the draft out, the committee will review, and we'll talk a little bit about that in terms of how that review will take place. We'll incorporate edits from that, and then that will more or less be the inventory analysis report that we'll be using for the comprehensive plan. All right, so let's dive into some of the details. So population change, let's start there. So for the most part, as you can see, what we did was we tried to compare the town of Lewisboro to Westchester County just in terms of general population trends. The town of Lewisboro since 1990 has grown about 7.76%, where Westchester County has increased about 12.9%. So basically the town of Lewisboro is increasing less than what you see in trends of Westchester County overall. One of the things that we started looking into, again, in the hamlet planning areas, as we're calling them, and if you recall, we finalized those boundaries back in September. So what we did is we took those boundary areas and we calculated the overall change in population from those various boundary areas. And in the inventory analysis document, we are definitely making sure we highlight the fact that, these are hamlet planning areas. They're not necessarily official hamlet boundaries, but this gives us an idea of what changes have occurred within the different hamlets areas. And so the data here shows an overall slight decrease in population. Now I'll caveat that because I think a lot of this data falls within the standard of error. I mean, we really are talking about, just a small amount, a couple thousand data points, more or less. So what we're finding is that we consider this to be, while there might be a slight decrease, overall, we think that the population itself has remained rather stable within the various planning areas. What you will see, and then again, this is based upon, we didn't divide up the town specifically, uniformly into 6 different quadrants. We looked at the hamlet areas in terms of general planning approaches and where the town sort of sees the divide. So in terms of population itself, the population itself, it's not necessarily that there's nobody living in Cross River. It's possible that Cross River might be a little bit smaller, and so therefore it might have a little bit less population. But in general, the population between the hamlet areas is relatively stable. And we also, in the document itself, you'll see we'll go into some population densities and stuff like that. So that's, that also is a helpful information. So basically, the town's population in general is generally aging. Lewisboro's median age has increased from 42.7 years to 46.8 years in 2020. There's 2 age cohorts since 2010 that have increased, and that's the 25 to 34-year-olds as well as the 55 to 85-year-olds. So when we usually see a cohort increasing both in terms of the age of Lewisboro as well as that the 55 to 85 plus year cohort increasing, that usually indicates that people are aging in place and not necessarily downsizing. And that is, that's a good thing that people want to stay within their community. But one of the things that also becomes problematic is that you don't have people downsizing and therefore new units opening up for new families to come in. So that sometimes becomes a little bit problematic. And this isn't just for the town of Lewisboro. We're seeing this all over Westchester County and even in Putnam County as well. But what we did find, and here the third point is the same thing. The age distribution for the town of Lewisboro is very similar to what we're seeing in Westchester County as well. Okay, so diving a little bit into race and ethnicity. So what you'll find is that Lewisboro itself has become more diverse, especially some from 2010 to 2020. It also has become more diverse over the years as well, since even back in like the 1990s. So what you see is there's a general trend of Lewisboro becoming more diverse, and your overall population, especially in the Hispanic population, has increased. And that I think, generally is what I've heard amongst the different committees and amongst this committee as well, is that you see this general trend. Lewisboro is not as diverse as Westchester County and the average of Westchester County, but for the most part, diversity is increasing. Oh, and one other thing just to note, our data is showing that the race and ethnicity general patterns are the same throughout all the Hamlet planning areas as well. So what we're not finding any sort of concentration in any particular race or ethnicity. It's generally distributed throughout the town. So Lewisboro's education attainment, you're a very highly educated community, especially in comparison to Westchester County. Approximately 84.4% of the town's population has obtained some college or higher education levels. And approximately 6.7% of the population only received a high school diploma. When comparing that to with Westchester County, in Westchester County, 72% of the Westchester County residents obtained some college or higher education levels. So Westchester County 72% and Lewisboro is at 84%. Household income. There is a general increase in the median household income from 2010 to 2020. We also found that in comparison to year 2000, Lewisboro's household median income was $112,000. So there was a large jump between year 2000 to 2020 of about approximately $50,000 a year in median household income. One of the other things to note that we noticed is that while your overall median household income has increased, we are seeing a slight increase in those that are making less than $35,000 a year in income. Larry, you had a question?
Yeah, on the income, that change in between 2010 and 2020, do you know if that's adjusted for inflation?
So the way the way the census does, it doesn't adjust it for inflation. It just identifies what the median household income is at that point in time. And keep in mind for 2020, inflation, I know we're dealing with a lot of inflation now. This is prior to that. And this data itself, while it was released in 2020, the census data usually starts, its collection about a year or so earlier than that, and so some of the numbers that we see, you also have to take into consideration with the COVID situation. And that comes into play, especially when you're dealing with some of your housing prices and stuff like that. It's so, basically it changes. And as you can see from pre-COVID to post-COVID, within those few years, the housing prices have drastically increased. But overall, what we're seeing in terms of trends for the town of Lewisboro is that your income is increasing, and you'll soon see soon enough your population's increasing as well as your housing prices. So Hamlet planning area incomes, again, we did the same analysis for them. And so in generally, again, while you do have a little bit of some changes, your lowest is 178,000 in terms of Lewisboro Hamlet, and your highest is, Golden's Bridge, Cross River, and Walkabuck all have the highest at about 200,000 per year. What we find though, generally, the income distribution is, distributed pretty evenly throughout, the town. There are some communities that will have very, very distinct areas where you have very low income versus very high income, and we don't necessarily see that within the town of Lewisboro. Janet, you had a question?
Yes, so this I think says 2022 compared to the prior one. And would it be possible to put sort of the Lewisboro town, the whole group together? Because I think just trying to look at this compared to the prior chart with 2020 on it, it looked like there was some significant shifts. And so I think if you could, that would help sort of make a baseline, or put 2022 on the prior chart, because it seems to me that things shifted more than.
Right. So this is where we get into the difficulties with the data. So for example, and this is a really good point, that, this is where I'm working with another community right now that they've asked these same similar questions. So this data is based on the US Census American Community Survey estimates, right? So this data is pulled directly from the US Census data, where they take the town of Lewisboro. This data itself is from Esri Business Analysts. So what we can do is we can take those Hamlet boundary areas. Those Hamlet boundary areas can be brought into this other program, and then it pulls the data. So technically the data that it's pulling, it counts as, it considers it as 2022 income. And that's how it gets distributed. And it bases its income data based off of US Census, and then it has a formula in itself. So the data is slightly different, and it will be slightly different because of the data sources that it's being pulled from. But the bottom line is, again, I think that's where the data needs to be looked at is slightly more on a macro level. And so whether or not, for example, this is median household income at 163,000, and this is saying the median household income is, like, for example, with Golden's Bridge, 200,000. This is based off of Golden's Bridge residents only, and it doesn't account for the entire town. And again, these numbers are also potentially have different higher standard deviations, because now we're dealing with, instead of a population of 12,000 people, we're talking about a population of just a couple thousand, So that's where a lot of this comes into play. But again, it goes back to the general trends, and the general trends is that, your income is increasing, but when you look at it in a Hamlet by Hamlet area, you're not seeing, and one of the things that we always look for in terms of like planning and comprehensive plans is, are you seeing an area that has like a concentration of poverty, right? Or are you seeing an area where there are issues that are taking place that really need to be focused on? And we don't see that here, which is a good thing, right? You're seeing just a general distribution throughout the town of various income levels, as well as, the distribution itself is pretty stable throughout the town. When comparing that to Westchester County's median income is household median income is $99,000. Just overall, the town is wealthier than Westchester County. And again, as you see, that it's distributed throughout the town.
Yeah. So, and I get that the data are different and they come from different sources, but I think, so if the point that you just made, the median household income for the census was 163,000. So if you looked at any one of these in isolation, you'd say, oh, look at Cross River is more than the town. Oh, look at Golden's Bridge is more than the town. Well, it turns out every hamlet is more than the town, which is why if you just put on the right-hand side or somewhere Lewisboro overall, then you would have a better sense of, okay, it's not that any one of these things is way above the town. They're all, I mean, I think it would make it easier to make your point that they're all pretty comparable. Whereas if you jump
absolutely.
to 163 on the prior page and you look at this, you say, whoa, and if you're only looking at one in isolation, it's just an idea to try to make it less.
Yeah, no, thank you very much. In the document itself, these are the tables themselves are very close to each other, and they're discussed in comparison to each other. But I can, you know, if we do present this again, I mean, this is just for the committee. So if this table gets into any other sort of presentation, then we'll definitely highlight it for sure. Thank you. So the next thing we wanted to talk a little bit about was housing. So as you can see here, what we did was we broke down the planning area housing units. Again, we have information both townwide or whatever, but just today I wanted to talk a little bit about the housing units in terms of the different hamlet areas. What you'll find is that, you know, we have the housing counts for the different hamlet areas, and we have, for the most part, most of them are owner occupied versus in comparison to rentals. The highest areas that have the rentals are Lewisboro, Hamlet, Vista, as well as Golden's Bridge. But again, when you look at, you know, townwide, you have 3 of your 6 hamlets all have generally the same percentage of rental housing. And then the other 3 of your 6 hamlets also have a general comparison in terms of rental housing. So I think for the most part, your rental housing, again, is distributed throughout the town in various hamlets. One of the other things that we also wanted to touch upon and let the committee know is that we're finding that the number of housing units in the town overall is on the rise. You're experiencing about a 10% total housing increase in the last decade, from about like 4,600 units to about 5,100 units. This is the highest increase in housing in the last 30 years. So that's a good thing in terms of, you know, we all know that there's a regional housing crisis. And so the town of Lewisboro clearly is helping to address some of those issues. So for example, in comparison, in 1990, Lewisboro had about 4,300 housing units. And then in 2000, it had 4,400 units. So basically in 30 years, it had less of an increase in housing units than you've seen over the last 20 years. Janet, you had a
Yeah, so do you have a sense of what's happening here on this? Because our population, I think for the last 20 years has been relatively flat.
Right.
And yet we have this increase. And also, so if it's not either owner occupied or rented, is it, are these more seasonal, you know, people who are, this is a second home or Airbnbs, or do you have any sense of what, you know, it seems like the units are going up, but the population is flat. So unless everybody's getting divorced and moving into, you know, separate housing, which I don't think is happening, what, you know, I don't quite get what's happening there.
So what we're finding is what's actually happening is that people are having their families, their kids are moving out and they're staying in place. So we're actually finding the total number of like and I actually I don't have the information. I think you're less than 2 people per household at this point. And I have the exact number, it's like 1 point something per household. And what we're finding is the majority of the people within the town of Lewisboro actually either live by themselves or live with like one other person. So that's what you're seeing is taking place. And that's why you can have an increase in housing units, but their overall population has remained relatively stable. And this is not unique to the town of Lewisboro. We're seeing this in other communities as well. But one of the things that I did want to also highlight, so let's talk about the actual housing units that we're seeing being developed too. And this is another positive trend, I think, for Lewisboro, and in terms of like goals that Lewisboro has set out. And it's clearly they are, you know, moving towards those goals. So for example, in 2010, 83% of all housing units were what we call one unit detached, or basically your single family detached housing units. In 2020, that has decreased to 79.3%. So, which means that you are creating more housing options within the town of Lewisboro. And Kirsten gave us some interesting data, so that a total of 157 housing units have been approved or pending approvals since like 2018. And only 40% of the new housing units that have been approved or pending approvals are single family detached housing. So the town of Lewisboro is working towards incorporating more housing options, where for the most part, from, you know, for decades, its primary housing unit was single family detached. So that's another trend that I think is noteworthy in terms of, you know, goals that the town has set. And this also includes 42 affordable homes, townhome units that will be rentals as well. Charlene, you had a question?
You have the 2 units and the 3 and 4 units. Does that indicate, like, if you have one big house and then cottages on your property, is that what?
Yeah, so typically, right, so that's a good question. So typically one unit attached is like a townhome. So where,
yes, yeah.
Right, where the 2 units could be more than one on a property, or it could be a 2-family home.
Well, is there any way to sort of clarify that?
No, there's not. The only way we can do that, we have and I'll have to take a look in the land use data. We do have 2 families there, but that's as far as we can get drilled down as to how they're being taxed. And I believe 2 families can be taxed with 2 single units on a property. I'll have to take a look at the tax codes. If there's a very specific tax code that has, you know, for 2 single family homes on a property, then that will come out in the land use data. But I'll double check. I believe it's just a 220. And that's the tax code, I believe.
Yeah, because there's a lot of properties that do have like a couple of houses on it, you know, especially with the farms. Right.
Well, we do. So we do note that, you know, you have a couple of different, you know, you have a number of different affordable housing initiatives. And one of them is the accessory dwelling units, where you can have more than one, you know, like when we say unit detached on a property. So you can have like you said, like the farm and like a cottage on the farm itself. So I don't necessarily have that information readily available. I'll see if we have that in the data, but if not, if it's something that maybe the town might actually keep tabs of that, especially if they're accessory dwelling units, then we can always include those as well.
Also, is there any way to sort of break it out into the hamlets?
This information, we do have it in the hamlet areas. I just didn't have it for the presentation because we have a lot to get through tonight. So I just wanted to give you like a little snapshot, but we do have it for the hamlet areas. And I think for the most part, again, we're not seeing anything in terms of major trends in like, you know, or concentrations in any particular hamlet area, which is, again, it's a good thing to find. But so if we did, that would definitely get highlighted. But we wanted to just sort of, the one trend we did see is that you are diversifying your housing options within the town.
Thank you.
And it's clear that those have been initiatives that the town has made, and they're actually becoming, you know, it's becoming successful in terms of housing developments. But I'll try to get the accessory apartment information from the town. Kirsten, maybe would you be able to see if the building department has that information?
Sure, it used to be a lot easier. They had inspections.
Mhm.
So I'll see if building department can come up with that data.
Okay, that'd be great. So one other thing I wanted to note for tonight is housing prices. So now the median housing price is, now this is now, again, I'm going to caveat, this is census data, is about $613,500. So we all know what's taking place now, but I think bottom line is your housing prices are increasing, period. You know, and I think, but it's all over Westchester County. Again, town of Lewisboro is not specifically unique to what's been taking place, especially in the whole Hudson Valley region since COVID. One of the things that we wanted to talk a little bit about tonight was the affordability gap. So we used the Westchester County 2019 Westchester County housing study because they did a really good job in the housing study. Their analysis is spot on, and really the issue is, again, is just highlighting the issue and what we're seeing in the trends. So the affordable housing gap back in 2019 for rental was $621 a month, and the affordability gap for purchase housing was $248,000, and that was off a median income of $148,000 in 2017. So move this forward, you know, your household median income did increase by $20,000, but your housing prices definitely increased more than $20,000 since 2019. So the issue is that there is an affordability gap for both rental housing and for purchase housing, and that has not changed. And the gap still remains, and it's something that I know that, again, the town of Lewisboro is working towards, but it is an issue that still exists within the town, and it's not, and what we're seeing in any of the trends, it's not reversing itself. Charlene?
Well, it may be housing prices are going to go down, but mortgage rates are going up.
Yes.
How do you account for that in the mix? I mean, I don't really know how.
So, right. So if you were to do a housing analysis, right, that's a separate study, you would then, as part of your calculation, and like what Westchester County did as part of their calculation, they include, like, you know, your basically your mortgage rates and stuff like that. And that's how you calculate your gap.
Okay.
We are not undertaking like a specific affordable housing gap study in this particular analysis, mostly because Westchester County just came out with one, and it's a very solid analysis, and I think it's an important analysis. But the bottom line is, based upon what we're seeing in terms of median income, in terms of housing trends, you know, you're still affordability gap still exists, both in rental housing and for purchase housing. And there's nothing that we're seeing in the trends in the market that suggests that that trend is reversing itself.
Thank you.
So, but I think that's a really good point that you raised, and I'm going to make note of that in terms of making sure that our report sort of highlights the fact that housing is increasing, even if it does decrease. We have the mortgage rate issue that's also taking place. And so the bottom line is, the end result is going to be that there's the affordability gap is still going to exist. Right. So that is sort of just really briefly as to where things are within the town in terms of demographics and in terms of housing. Like I said, this is just, there are these are two chapters, and also in the chapters we dive a little bit more detail in terms of commuting patterns. We talk a little bit more about in terms of where people are working, We also talk a little bit about the sectors in which people are employed in. So there's definitely more information in these two chapters, but in terms of timing, tonight, we wanted to just kind of give you a little snapshot and sort of highlights. Next month, I'm going to come back and talk a little bit about your land use and zoning and some of your environmental resources. I think that has some really interesting stuff and some implications that, this committee is going to want to consider. And then in December, I'm going to talk a little bit about community facilities, infrastructure, and probably economics. And then, we'll be providing you the document in January or December to start reviewing. And clearly we won't be able to get to all the topics before you get the document. There's just a lot of information. If there's any particular topic area that you really want me to try to provide some additional information prior to the distribution of the document, I can try to fit that into one of the presentations. But I know in the next couple of months, we're also going to be dealing with the upcoming public workshops. So we have a lot of information to kind of get through in each meeting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you for that presentation, Valerie. We have till 8:15 on the agenda for questions from the group for Valerie about tonight's specific presentation or the path for the future presentations that she laid out.
Janet?
Yeah, so if we have more feedback on maybe, questions we have or something on this, can we just is the best thing to do, just send it to you?
Sure. I think in terms of, why don't you send it to me and then I can see what I have best to answer. If it's in terms of, are we looking at certain data or whatever, I can provide you that information. If you're looking for certain data, I can let you know if that's forthcoming or not. I mean, I don't want to what I'd like to do is, and I think it's probably going to be best, especially how detailed oriented this committee is. I think it'll be best once you have the whole document, because there are times where something gets discussed in one chapter that, if you're reading another chapter, then you might say, well, why isn't this being discussed? But it was in another chapter. So I think it's really going to be beneficial for this committee to review the document as a whole. But I understand you'll need a few months to kind of get chew your way through it and then raise questions. And we probably will have to have some sort of maybe work session where we just talk about some of the questions that you have, like similar to tonight, that maybe I can answer for you. And then if we need to make certain adjustments in the document, we can do so at that point.
Yeah, I just have a couple of suggestions for formatting some of the tables that might make some of the points a little clearer, and more than anything else. And you can either say, nope, I think the point is made elsewhere and ignore it, or adopt it. But I wanted, rather than take up everybody's time, I thought maybe I'd email you that.
That sounds great. Yep, I'd love to hear that. Thank you.
And just point of organization, just anytime you want to email Valerie for folks here, if you can make sure to copy Kirsten, the steering at Plan Lewisboro, just so all the communication can be found on one email address. And then if you also can copy me, that would be great. Valerie and I are just keeping a very close eye on making sure that this project stays on budget. And as we get to something like the inventory analysis report, we want to make sure that we're filtering all of the feedback that we get from the various committees through the steering committee. That way we can kind of streamline everything and save Valerie and her team some working hours. That way we don't, overload the hourly budget.
And yeah, and so one of the things that we will need to talk a little bit about next month, and I was talking to Katie a little bit about this, is that once we have the report once we have a draft, is who we're going to send if this committee wants to send the draft to other committees for feedback, then we're going to have to figure out how we're going to consolidate the comments, and then also determine which comments get addressed and which comments don't get addressed. Because you'll find that, you will receive comments that will say, well, how about you include X, Y, and Z? And the committee might decide, no, we're not including that. So those are discussions that we're going to have in terms of review. A lot of times comprehensive plan committees will just review the document themselves and then just post it for like public feedback. But if you prefer to send it to very specific committees or boards, that can be done. We just need to coordinate how the comments are going to come back and be vetted.
Yeah, and I should clarify that as we have throughout this entire process, I think that it's our feeling on this committee that we want that. We want as many of the town boards and committees involved in sharing their feedback because we consider them the subject matter experts. But yeah, I think there's a way we can do it where we just filter all the comments through the committee. That way we do some volunteer hours. That way Valerie and her team don't have to put all the hours on the budget spreadsheet. That was my thinking, but I'm definitely open to whatever the committee thinks about that. And we don't have to decide right now. It's sort of we're going to need to decide before December. I saw there were, Larry?
Yeah, I just had a quick question. I think I saw it on the slide that showed the timeline and the schedule, but I just wanted to confirm what our schedule and timeline looks like for the first, I mean, we're having public meetings regularly with the committee, but the first like workshop or time when we're going to get together as a community, whether it's in Zoom or in person, can you just highlight what the current timeline and schedule looks like?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I was going to talk a little bit about that later on in the agenda, but I can touch upon it now. So
let's pause that for a sec and see if anybody has any questions specifically about the presentation tonight or the process with future presentations. No? Okay, go for it.
Okay. And also next month, you're going to get some pretty maps. So there's not as many pretty maps in the demographic section. So in terms of setting dates, I do have some potential dates that we can talk about later on, but we're anticipating having the first public meeting in January. This way it will come on the heels of finishing up the inventory analysis report. But mostly I think it's because we want to try to avoid the Thanksgiving to Christmas, Hanukkah, all the holiday seasons, and so that way hopefully we'll get as much large turnout as possible. And we're thinking about having them virtual based upon some of the feedback that at least I received a lot of feedback in terms of committees interested in virtual, and the public outreach and participation survey clearly shows a strong interest in having virtual meetings. And I just, was listening to the news today and there's wonderful new COVID variants. So I have a feeling that that virtual is probably going to be the safest bet during the winter. So we were thinking, because I know this committee really wants to make the community outreach as approachable of a process as possible and getting as much feedback and much participation as possible. So in terms of developing or having to, and we want it to be as accessible as possible. So I find that Zoom has lots of bells and whistles, but if people don't feel comfortable with dealing with all the bells and whistles, that can be an accessibility obstacle in and of itself. So what we were thinking about doing is trying to develop like breakout rooms. And if we have, like, based upon the staffing that we can provide, we can probably have somewhere around like 80 people or so, at one particular meeting where the breakout rooms are a manageable level in which we can really have that dialogue, right? So right now we have 11 people. So we can probably push it to maybe like 15, 20 people, right? 20 people is probably the max where it starts becoming too many people for actually being able to have that kind of real dialogue. And so we were thinking of having the virtual meetings on multiple nights. And we were thinking maybe up to like 3 nights, and then asking people to pre-register for the virtual meetings. And at which point, then we'll have a better sense of like how many people are registering. And so for staffing purposes, but then also this gives us a way to help manage and distribute the breakout rooms, and then we can keep that kind of dialogue we're allowing that to take place in the meetings. Charlene? You're muted.
Will there be any in-person? Because some people, I would imagine, don't have computers. Then you have the very elderly that may not have access to it. So do we have any ideas on how to broach those issues, those groups of people who may have?
Right, so we are planning to do some sort of focus group with the seniors. But I was planning to do that in between like public meeting 1 and public meeting 2. So I can do sort of the public meeting 1 is really going to be what we call like a SWOT, like the strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats within the town of Lewisboro. It's a really good way to get the community engaged. But I also think, based upon the stuff I'm seeing in the public surveys, based on what I heard from the committee, a lot of people have a lot of ideas. And I think it would be a really good opportunity to be able to have everybody open up and
Oh, Valerie, you muted.
And provide feedback on undertaking the SWOT. So I was planning to, but we also want to be able to the following workshop, we'll be talking about recommendations. It will be talking about, information that we have, obtained from the inventory analysis, from the initial public workshop. And so I also want to be able to provide that information to the seniors as well. So I was thinking of having that in between the two.
Right. You've done so many comprehensive plans, and I would imagine you've done some during COVID. How do you do outreach for those groups that are not easily have access to a computer?
So I think in terms of, we can do, like, that's the thing, we can do a public in-person workshop, right? We would encourage those. We can also, that's the thing, we can arrange it so that we have 2 virtual workshops and 1 in-person workshop, if you want to do something like that. And we really have the flexibility, and we can work around you. I think in terms of once this committee decides what it wants to do, I can work with Katie and the town board in terms of budget, because we did anticipate having we budgeted enough to have an in-person workshop with like about 4 or 5 people over a span of like a number of hours.
For workshop number 1, just want to clarify, we're talking about 1 right now, 1 of 9, just 1 of 9.
Yes.
Because meeting number 2, we're talking about having in person, and that would be in spring 2023.
Right.
And I would really like Valerie's input as what does she think is most successful and really reaches those. I mean, your opinion, not.
Right. No. I understand that. I'm going to say, and you're not going to probably like this answer, but it really depends on the community. And the reason why I say that is there are some communities that don't like that. Absolutely no virtual, right? Everything has to be done in person. Then I have other communities that they want heavy presence on the virtual and less in person. We have some communities that want, like we're working in a community right now in the town of Hurley, and they're insisting, they want to have their first public workshop on a Saturday, and it's all Saturday long for 2 different sessions. So each community is very different in terms of what it wants in its public outreach. That's where I think this public participation information survey is very helpful. And also based upon what I'm hearing from the different committees and stuff, most everybody said virtual. I have not heard too many people asking for in-person meetings. That being said, we could even work up with some other ideas of allowing, like maybe developing some posters or some things that, you could even just have in town hall or in the public library where people could put their feedback in without having to have that specific in-person session as well. Okay. So there's a number of different options we can consider and look at for the first workshop.
I'm not expressing myself very well. Maybe if I pose the question this way. from the amount, the residents in a particular town,
Yes,
village, or whatever. The percentage that have participated in the whatever workshops they have and in whatever manner, what is the most successful?
right. And so, and that's why I'm saying, you know, it depends, because if a community likes to have its in-person meetings, that's where they'll get the most participation. They will not get a high participation virtual. If a community likes to have virtual, they'll get high participation in terms of the virtual meetings. So that's why I'm saying it's really based on the feedback we're receiving right now. It seems like virtual is something that's a must for this town, and it's something that a lot of people want to see happen. We can do a combination of both, where we have maybe 2 virtual events and 1 in-person event, if you would like to consider that. If you feel that there's enough people that want to come to a particular area within the town to have that kind of virtual.
Well, I know I'm being a pain in the ass about this, but if we look at, because most of the surveys have been done on a computer.
Yes.
Now, if we look at that and how many have done on a written, do the written ones, the written surveys that have been handed in, what percentages of they say virtual, or do they say in person? It's just a point of interest.
No, I understand what you're getting at, is that because it's a virtual survey, you're going to have a lot more people picking
Saying
virtual.
I want virtual.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. But from what I've gathered, though, over the last couple of years, most of the community outreach, correct me if I'm wrong, has been on a virtual platform as opposed to an in-person platform. And so I think the community is probably used to the virtual platform. We can create an in-person, format as well, and have the hybrid, and see what happens the first meeting and see how successful one version is, one format is over another.
Because that participation is one of our primary goals.
Yes.
And
yes.
I'm just asking questions in order to ascertain what the best way would do it. And
right.
If we have any indications, since it's a town or village determination, is there any indication from the surveys that we've received as to which way would be better, or both ways, or
Well, I don't. How many paper copies have we received? Katie, do you happen to have that information?
I haven't heard that we've received. Oh, Kirsten's unmuting. She would have that.
Just 2.
Okay.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So I think to Charlene's point, we won't know until we kind of act. Like right now, people are just answering a theoretical survey. We don't actually have a meeting scheduled, and we can't see what the actual participation is in the meeting is. But we do want to be really mindful of equity. So regardless of how many paper surveys we receive, we know for a fact that there's an older adult population within town that might have trouble joining or enjoying participating in a virtual meeting. But we have a wonderful resource in the town senior coordinator that she holds monthly, I think it's monthly events. She has a mailing list. She has a brochure that gets sent out to folks. So there is a way to reach that population, and we're committed to having at least one focus group event with them between the first meeting and the second meeting. So I think it's a really good way to address equity issues. But I see Dan and Andrea have their hands raised, so let's go to them. Go ahead.
Just a quickie, and this may also be part of the future plans. Was there going to be Hamlet-specific community meetings as well as the whole town?
Yes. So we're the second round of workshops, we're going to have one townwide and then one in each individual hamlet area. I think right now we were anticipating having maybe the townwide one in person and then the individual hamlet areas virtual. But again, that can be easily changed in formats. If we identify various areas within each hamlet that can house like a public meeting, we can do it all in person. So it really just depends on, I think, well, first of all, I think also the circumstances and as we go through the next few months and see what happens in terms of if there's a resurgence in COVID or anything like that. But let's just say everything's wonderful and we can either pick one format or another. We can start discussing that. And I think that will be based upon what kind of participation we see in the first round of public outreach.
And one more thing I just want to quickly highlight. Part of the reason why we're getting the feedback from the town committees that virtual is a must, at least some access point of virtual, is that it's important for equity, because there are people that are not able to attend in-person meetings, just like there are people that are unable to attend a virtual meeting, but there is a significant and loud need for virtual for equity issues.
What I wanted to add was that I think what we're seeing with the town board meetings, we continue to offer a hybrid. So people are attending virtually and people are coming in person. And what's been interesting in the past several months is that the number of people coming in person has increased. When people are interested, they feel, or it's my impression, that they want to come in person to be heard. But as long as you're able to offer, I don't know, how we're working out the logistics of the meetings, who's running the Zoom or the virtual end of it, et cetera. I just know that it's been and we're one of the very few towns that are still doing this. It's helpful and there's more people participating than before. So if we can offer them simultaneous somehow, that might be helpful.
Right. So, I mean, I think, well, in terms of, that's the thing, we could do something like that where we have an in-person event and we also have a virtual event, maybe not on the exact same day, but we could have them on like within the same week on 2 separate days, if that's something of interest to the town.
But why can't we do them at the same time?
Well, I think it really comes down to staffing, right? And how many people we can.
That was
right. I think the committee has indicated, because in some communities, we will have some of the committee members help assist with some of the, outreach or, for example, like the SWAT will help undertake, certain components of the public meetings just to have more bodies. But I think I've heard that there's interest to have trained professionals, trained planners to carry out all the public engagement piece and the facilitation. So, which is fine, we can do that. So I think probably having it in 2 separate days would be, more beneficial. However, I will note that based on what I was seeing in the survey, there seems to be an interest in like weekday evenings seem to be a high interest, but then weekday afternoons and Saturday mornings also seem to get, votes in terms of potential availability. So we could do something where you have an evening, like virtual meeting, maybe Saturday morning, like in-person meeting, and then pick like an afternoon virtual meeting and then ask people to attend one of those 3 different venues. So that's an option too. I think what we need to do is we need to figure out the formats by next month so that we can start figuring out how everything's going to sort of unfold, so that December I'm able to come back to you with like basically what we call a run a show of how those different events would take place.
So remind us how many hours total for the first workshop? Did you say 3 hours total?
So I think in terms of the first workshop, I think we were thinking of having something like about 3 or 4 hours. So it would be almost like an open sort of like, we tend to like to do our workshops so that everyone doesn't have to show up exactly at the start time in order to be able to participate, so that people could come and participate throughout the time period. And so they don't have to stay all 2 hours. They can come, learn about the process, learn about the program, and then also provide their feedback and then leave when they'd like to leave.
But we could break it up into 3 or 4 separate sessions and an hour for each session and keep the attendance limited such that that would be enough time for everyone.
Right. I mean, you might want to do a little bit more than an hour for in-person. I think, you know, virtual, I think people tend to expect, I find that people like to be able to show up, do their virtual meeting, and then get off at the time that was identified. Where I think public meetings, you tend to get people that want to like come, maybe talk a little longer, maybe they run into their friends, they tend to stay a little longer than you would find on like a virtual meeting.
John, go ahead.
First, a comment in terms of the hybrid meeting, Andrea, I think the only place in town that's equipped to do that is the town boardroom, because they have the Lewisboro TV in there. So they don't do that for the planning board because they don't have the technology. But I have a question. When you run these meetings with a large number of people, is it organized in that they sign up, they have so many minutes to talk, or is it a kind of a free-for-all?
So it's not, we try not to have any free-for-alls. No, but what we do, for example, for the breakout rooms, because it's a small number of people, we can have something very similar to the dialogue that we're having tonight. We have people raise their hand, we have them speak, then we'll say, thank you very much. We're going to go on to the next person. So we do have the person that facilitates that situation. In terms of the workshops, when you have in person, again, because people kind of go from different stations to stations and can provide their input, there's not one person that, can dominate a conversation. Basically, other people can kind of come in, provide their feedback, and a lot of it's like post-it notes and stuff. So people don't even have to, if they really don't want to have any sort of dialogue, but just want to put their thoughts in, they can do that as well. So it's never a situation where we try not to have a situation where one person can dominate a conversation.
And it sounds more interactive as
Yes,
opposed to
yes.
just a line of people that speak and then move to the next.
Right. And we usually have like rules, so where we go through and make sure that everyone understands, like, it's supposed to be an open dialogue. There's not supposed to be, we don't want it to get contentious. People have different points of view, but we need to hear what the different points of view are. So I think then, so it sounds like the town would be interested in having one in-person event as part of the first public workshop. Am I correct on that?
We don't have the survey isn't closed yet. So we don't know for sure where that will land, but we definitely have that data to work off of right now. As long as we're offering a variety, what do folks think about that? Like three virtual and 1 in person, or 2 virtual and 1 in person? Charlene?
I'd rather talk amongst ourselves before we decide.
Okay, yeah.
Right now.
We don't have to make a decision. Jan, did you have a comment or question?
I did, but I'll defer to what Charlene said.
So maybe, Katie, would it be appropriate to have like homework for the next meeting to sort of give us the sense of how many in person, how many virtual the town would want? And then,
and just to clarify, just for meeting number 1,
yes,
we're talking about the 1 out of yeah, and I think perhaps it would be prudent to wait until the survey is closed on October 31st. And then everybody can actually look at the survey results and see. But yeah, we know that it's a virtual survey, and we're doing a really good job of advertising the survey, given that we have some active chairs of community outreach teams. We've got paper flyers up equally across town, all the grocery stores, all the post offices, all sort of the key community hubs have been covered with paper flyers in English and in Spanish. So we're doing our best to try to spread the word about the survey in a non-virtual way. But just the fact that it is online, will skew answers a little bit. So yeah, we'll see what the survey comes back with, and then we can make a decision. But I really like the idea. I like that we want to make sure it's interactive, because that's been a point that we've been saying very loudly since we issued the RFP,
Right.
that we want it to be interactive and engaging, and we want it to be as fairly accessed as possible. So having a variety of options is key to that, and keeping an eye on our focus groups and making sure that in addition to seniors, and we've also talked about veterans, that if there are any other organizations in town that we can be connected with that could help us organize focus groups with folks that would otherwise not be participating in either a virtual or an in-person platform. We ask community members and folks on this call tonight to think about that and make connections. So I think as long as we're being super mindful of all those things, whatever the outcome is, we'll make sure that we're keeping our mission front and center.
Right. And like I said, like we can come up with lots of different options for the town. So I'm not, we just need to get a general sense from you as what your interests are, and then we can come up with ideas that you might want to consider. But I do think the breakout rooms would probably be the best, because it will be interactive. There will be dialogues. It will be similar to what you experienced tonight, in terms of being able to voice your opinions, voice your thoughts. And I think that would be very helpful to the town. I think that's what I've heard based upon some of the feedback that I've been getting from the committees and boards when I've asked them what their thoughts are in terms of the platform. And everybody has said the same thing, that I think, what would not work is me coming up, giving a presentation for 45 minutes and saying, does anybody have any questions, and just taking a couple questions, right? It really needs to be that interactive. So I also anticipate, like, anything virtual is going to be if there's a presentation, it's going to be very short, and it's really going to be getting into the meat of the discussion.
That sounds great.
Okay. All right. So I think, go ahead, Katie.
So in terms of homework, yeah, we'll wait to see the survey results on October 31st, and then we can have a committee dialogue over email, or maybe do like a poll or something.
Yeah. Okay. That sounds good. And just another thing, that not to throw an option at you, but there is that possibility that we can decide, if the committee decides not to do in person, we could do something where, like, there's we have the virtual meetings at different times and different days. And we could also do something where we create a couple, like, poster boards and stuff that could be, put up at different, town public, like, town public halls or library or public places, and then have people ask people to provide feedback there as well. And then we can collect those after they're out there in the public for a few weeks. So that's an option. We could also do, like, we can also provide, like, the committee some information to do where, like, you're talking about pop-up events, instead you come up with, like, pop-up surveys, you know what I mean? And we do that. And that's a way of potentially engaging people in person and not necessarily having to have an in-person event. So that's something else to think about as well. So sorry, there's lots of different options out there in terms of public engagement. So
No, that's great. It's good food for thought. Okay, so looking at our agenda, we already covered the first workshop format options. So moving sort of into updates and wrap-ups of previous topics. Really quickly, just want to make a motion to approve the minutes from last month's meeting that were circulated via email. Can I get a second?
So moved.
Thank you. All in favor? Committee members?
Aye.
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 Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Speaking of the survey, just in terms of number of responses, Blair, do you want to talk about it, or do you want me to? Whatever you want.
If you're prepared to, that would be great.
Okay, I didn't want to put you on the spot, but I also didn't want to step on your toes since you are the Survey Monkey architect. So we almost have 400 responses. I'm very happy to report. And we have over 100 people that have volunteered. So if you remember, the first question is, do you want to volunteer to help with community outreach, or would you like to be added to mailing list to be alerted about future events? And over 100 people have volunteered to help. So that's really exciting. The survey has also helped us uncover community members who, one in particular, reached out to volunteer to help translate outreach materials, the survey, potentially future focus groups or other plan materials into Chinese. And they're going to be the chair of a Chinese language outreach group to make sure we're engaging that portion of our population. We are working through networks of connections to try to find the same thing for a Spanish language outreach group. But everybody that I've spoken to that has reached out to volunteer or given feedback on the survey is really appreciative of the thought that we're putting into being inclusive and the time that we're taking to make sure that the community starts to get energized and understands how they can participate. John?
Yeah, and also, and Duffy, you'll like this. I've got a guy who reached out to me who's very enthusiastic about starting a Lewisboro Hamlet Association. So,
Oh, that's good.
Do they want to be the chair of the Lewisboro Hamlet Outreach Committee?
he does. He wants to put it together. He's trying to get some videos to get people interested. So,
okay.
So Duffy, it's going to be more than you and me, Duffy.
Can you please put him in touch with me and Kirsten so we can get him officially signed up and
well, yeah, just one thing. He doesn't like email, so I only talk to him by text.
Oh, okay.
So I'm working with him. When we get a little bit farther along, I'll connect
Okay.
him up. But I'm trying to get him some information on some of the things that Maureen Cole did on Lewisboro on Zoom a couple of years ago, so he can get some enthusiasm going. But I thought that's kind of interesting that Lewisboro Hamlet is coming to life.
Great. Yeah, the community we're still looking for chairs of community outreach teams for the South Salem Hamlet, the Lewisboro Hamlet, and Walkabuck Hamlet. And there's no limit to the number of community outreach teams we have if someone has an interest in sharing a different one. But the goal with those is really to spread information about the public forums, about the surveys, and just make sure that we need a lot of volunteer power to get all the flyers posted up equally across town, make sure that they're posted in each hamlet in an equal fashion. And, just word of mouth, the more people organizing the outreach as possible. So that's where these community outreach chairs will come into focus.
And Katie, on next month's agenda, we also probably should add in, besides the format, discussing translation in terms of how we want to handle those.
Mm-hmm. Yes. next month's agenda. Will you make a note of that for me, actually?
Yeah, and there's, as you can imagine, there's options for this committee to pick on in terms of
Yeah.
what we
I
can
think the
do.
good news is that budget conscious, we have enough volunteers sort of bubbling up on a grassroots level that we can manage a lot of translation and focus group translation with volunteer power from the community, which will be really helpful for budget.
Right, and it is, and the reason why I say that, I mean, in terms of, and and we clearly know that this is not being budget driven, but there are there's a lot of different options, right? Do you have somebody there for every single meeting in case, or do you say, you can advertise and say, this is the date and time that we're going to have this translation available. There's also options of, how much you want to translate in terms of the public outreach materials. So those we can discuss those next month. And the reason why we will definitely need decisions next month on that, because there is a little bit of a lead time in order to put together everything and then also send it out and get things translated as well. And just making sure that we have the appropriate staff for that too. So, but it's very exciting that you have all these volunteers. Excellent.
No, those are really important considerations. And yes, good point. I don't want to make it seem like these decisions are being driven solely by budget, but I do want everyone also to know that we are being budget conscious because it's a big project with so many layers, and we want to make sure that we at least have an open, transparent dialogue about it so that no one's surprised or concerned, and that we have, time as a committee to decide where we want to shift or adjust, just in a prudent fashion ahead of time, as opposed to being reactive and looking back and saying, whoops. So any questions about the survey or the community outreach groups?
And Katie, I just want to make one note on surveys in general. So next month, I'm planning to come back to this committee with some survey questions that if you recall, we talked about having a survey each month, just a couple questions each month, so that maybe instead of people might be more engaged to just answer a few questions each month, as opposed to getting a survey where there's 20 questions and they actually have to sit down for a half an hour and run through them. So the committee asked last month about doing what they call the crowdsource mapping. We are able to do that, so that's an option. So we're going to come back with a number of different questions that specifically relate to where we see information that would be very helpful in terms of moving the process forward and obtaining the additional outreach information we'll need for the comprehensive plan recommendations. So you'll see those next month as well.
Awesome. So pop-up events, I wanted to thank Charlene for representing the committee and spreading the word about our survey at the New Neighbors event that was earlier this month. And Charlene, how did that go?
That went great, really, because everybody who was at the event, including Andrea, who was there, as was Tony Gonzalez and Mary Shaw, really gave a rousing endorsement of taking the survey and being prepared and being involved. So I want to thank you very much. And it went very, very nicely. And I met a few, I'm so glad they're in the community, people.
That's awesome.
It was cold though, wasn't it, Andrea? Really
We're
cold.
getting a lot of people coming up from Brooklyn. I think at least 2 new families came up from Brooklyn that we met that day. So they were very interested to see what Lewisboro had to offer and, get information. They were interested in, what we were doing with the master plan. So it was really very productive.
And they all were enjoying themselves in Lewisboro.
Well, thank you to the board for your continued support. That's a good moment to just say none of this would be possible without your support. Speaking of a good time, Larry's gonna be representing us at Trunk or Treat for a pop-up event there.
Trunk or Treat on True Farm Park this Saturday, 11 to 2. So I'm reaching out to the other volunteers for outreach to see who will be able to join me. And of course, anybody on the committee is welcome and encouraged to join me as well.
I will, Larry. We can
Thanks,
discuss it
Shirley.
offline.
What's your costume, Larry?
I hadn't planned that yet.
That'll be a really good chance just to, especially the survey is super easy to spread the word about. We've got the QR code. That's really awesome. Let's see, the next topic. Does anybody have any questions about pop-up events? I think that in terms of town parks and rec events, that the next big one that was on our list was the first day of the year. I forget what that's called.
Let's see.
First day.
Yep.
But if there's something that comes up between now and then, it's really just a matter of volunteer power. So the more the merrier. The more events we can spread the word out, the better.
Does Larry, do you need treats for that, for this Saturday? I can't go, but do you need stuff? Like, what are you giving away?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll reach out to you, Rose.
Okay.
Thanks, everybody. The next topic, Greenway grant. Mark was pulled away with a work project tonight, but he did say that he would try to have a draft of the grant sent around by the end of the week so that folks could take a look at it and provide input. And so we thank him so much for his efforts there. And I know he's been working hard on that for a while. So stay tuned, keep an eye on email for that. And I know this will want the steering committee to certainly weigh in. And if other boards want to take a peek, that would be fantastic, but not obligated. We'll see what we're working with and what's there, and then we can kind of make a plan for gathering feedback. And I think the deadline is early November. In terms of connecting with or community organizations for members of the community that would otherwise be underrepresented in our process, I did make a connection with a group called Westchester Latinos United, and we're working on it's just got to be about finding a couple people within the community that want to volunteer and help with outreach, and then I think spreading the word and figuring out possible focus groups or translation and broader meetings will kind of unfold organically. So we're working on making those connections. Charlene, I wanted to follow up with your work with Neighbors Link and.
Yeah, I'd like to have an offline discussion with you on that, please.
Okay, sure. So we're making the efforts to find the community organizations that would connect us to these hard to reach groups or groups that would be otherwise underrepresented in our process. Pam Beath, amazing town resource for older adults. But again, any ideas folks have about community organizations or nonprofit groups or
Do we connect up with the folks who have handled the Juneteenth event?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And the town has some task force for veterans, and there's the LGBTQIA+ group. So there's already town resources in place that we can link up with just for making our process as inclusive as possible.
Do we do all of the mothers clubs that go on through the school district?
We've reached out to the PTOs, but not specific mothers clubs. So if you wouldn't mind sending me an email about that, that would be great.
Okay.
Right, and I think one of the things Katie will need to do is, so all this information you're gathering is great. Then the next step is figuring out how to use it in terms of like making sure that people get the information that they need, or if you're going to develop focus group, like, because what we can do, I mean, this is another thing. So if, for example, if like Charlene has a good connection with Neighbors Link, instead of, if Neighbors Link would prefer to do something sort of internal, we can provide very specific questions or something that Charlene then can work directly with Neighbors Link to get information.
Yeah,
right?
I appreciate that, Valerie, because that's one of the issues. Yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so these are options that we can do for you as well. So I think once the public survey closes, I think maybe the next thing is, and it might just even, we need to have like maybe a small subcommittee of this committee, but just to have like a meeting to kind of say, okay, let's go through what we're seeing. Because I even looked at how many email addresses you were coming up with. And one of the things that I was thinking about is like, yes, we have like the contact, like, the contact web blast type of thing that we can send out stuff from, but that'll be coming out potentially through like Nelson Pope and Voorhees versus the town of Lewisboro, and the town having something go out from the town of Lewisboro would probably be something that people would more likely respond to or open up than if it's something you know what I mean? So we need to think about those little aspects too, because the number of email addresses are large enough that I can't just send out an email from like my Outlook, right? We're going to have to use some sort of like web blast type of thing. So we need to probably talk about that, and maybe we just add those addresses into what the town already has. And then when you send out like your web blast for the upcoming meetings, those people will also get that information as well. So maybe that's something we'll need to have as a separate side of, okay, now that we have all this outreach stuff or this potential focus groups, how do we handle each one of these different aspects?
Yeah, that's a great point. Absolutely. I'm so grateful that we have this time in the process to collect this information and do this outreach, and then like pause and actually figure out how we can use it effectively.
Right.
Very good point.
And not to say that we definitely have January and we still have time to figure this all out. And I think we'll definitely be able to handle it, but we are still moving forward in the development of the documents and stuff like that. So that's not stopping anything, but I think this is important, especially in terms of all the different people that this community wants to engage, and also the different organizations, and making sure we get it right.
Yeah, for sure. So that's the end of our agenda. We have our next meeting on November 21st, which I know is a conflict with the town board meeting. So we won't be able to have our town board representatives here as well. But that's just the way that the scheduling works out for Valerie and her team and the holidays. And but thank you so much for everyone being here tonight. I know we're really close to time, but any big questions that anyone has on their mind that they didn't get a chance to ask tonight? Okay, great. Thank you so much, everybody, for your insight and your time and being here. So we will be reaching out via email with the homework items and some stuff to definitely discuss and move forward between now and November 21st. But thanks, Valerie, to you and your team for all the work you guys are doing.
Yeah, well, thank you. It's been a pleasure so far. So
thank you so much, everybody.
Right.
Motion to adjourn the meeting. John is seconding. All in favor? Aye, everybody. Okay, thank you so much. And thanks to the viewers on YouTube for sticking with us and for listening and participating. If you want to reach out to us, steering@planlewisboro.com, and our webpage is a great source of info. Thanks, everybody.